Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Then hold on tight because this one might just turn you inside out. It was an ordinary morning at the international airport. Rushed people, delayed flights, luggage everywhere. Amid the chaos, a young woman wearing jeans, plain sneakers, a simple backpack, and her hair tied back walked calmly toward the first-class line. No designer brands, no entourage, just serenity in her eyes and a printed boarding pass in hand. Her name, Lara. Her destination? Change. Right at the entrance to the line, an airline employee, stiff posture and rehearsed smile, did what so many still do without realizing. She judged. With her eyes, her tone of voice, a gesture of doubt. This line is for executives only, ma'am. Economy is over there. Lara smiled. A soft smile, not born from sarcasm or anger. It was the smile of someone who's seen this happen before, many times. She tried to explain, said yes. That was her ticket. She even showed the boarding pass, but it didn't help. The employee didn't even look. She'd already decided who Lara was, or rather, who Lara couldn't be. The stares around them followed the scene like a silent play, some with pity, others with that toxic smirk in the corner of the mouth. No one knew they were about to witness a plot twist that would go down in history, because Lara, in all her simplicity, was the new CEO of the airline. Yes, she had recently taken the position after years working behind the scenes, learning every department, every flaw, every hidden potential of the company, and she chose to board her first flight as a regular customer. No announcement, no fuss, no badge. She wanted to feel the service, the atmosphere, the company's culture, unfiltered. What she found was a mirror of the world, a perfect reflection of how we still judge without knowing, how we still label before hearing stories. How even in 2025, appearance is still a gatekeeper for belonging. But Lara didn't lash out. She didn't raise her voice or demand respect. She quietly stepped aside and called one of the airline's operations directors. She asked him to gather the airport team. "There's going to be a practical lesson today," she said. Minutes later, the regional manager arrived, pale when he saw her. The employee, still clueless, kept her air of superiority until she heard the words, "This is the company's new president." Silence. You could almost hear the shame hitting the floor. But Lara didn't want punishment. She wanted transformation. She gathered the staff right there and said, "I don't care about pretty protocols on paper if the culture is still elitist and exclusionary in practice. Excellent service doesn't depend on suits or high heels. It depends on humanity." And that's when something bigger than a boarding pass began. From that experience, she launched a series of mandatory trainings on empathy, human-centered service, and recognizing unconscious bias. She gathered real customer testimonies, promoted internal workshops, brought in psychologists and diversity experts, and created a program called The Stories You Don't See, which soon became a global reference. Every employee began to learn the backgrounds of real clients who had been ignored, rejected, or mistreated based on their appearance. Stories of people who became loyal customers after one act of kindness, or those who never returned after being dismissed. Stories that hurt, stories that transform, stories that educate. The initiative gained media attention. It was featured at leadership conferences, presented at international forums, and even became a Harvard case study. But above all, it created real impact. Satisfaction ratings soared, discrimination complaints dropped, and the company became a reference in ethical innovation. All of this because Lara didn't react with fury. She responded with purpose. She showed that leadership isn't about commanding, it's about inspiring, and that the biggest revolutions begin with the smallest choices. She could have flashed her badge, could have demanded respect. Instead, she used silence as a trap to prove that respect isn't demanded by rank. It's built through action. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a masterclass in awareness, an elegant response to a systemic problem. And more than that, it's a reminder that behind every ordinary face there may be hidden power, a silent mentor, a name capable of rewriting history. And you? How many times have you been underestimated for not looking important enough? Or worse, how many times have you labeled someone without knowing their story? How many stories have you ignored just because they were dressed in simplicity? Maybe it's time to stop seeing with judgment and start seeing with empathy. Lara isn't the exception. She just had the courage to be different in a world that confuses kindness with weakness and appearance with merit. But her lesson is clear. We're not defined by what we wear, but by what we carry. And it's these stories, hidden, erased, overlooked, that most deserve to be told. Lara arrived early at the airport, as always. Discreet, wearing regular jeans, a backpack, tied hair, and a light step that didn't draw attention. When she entered the first-class line, the attendant didn't even check the ticket. One glance up and down, and a crooked smile were enough. "This line is for executives only, ma'am," she said, as if issuing a final sentence. And just like that, with a few words, one of those stories began. The kind the world only realizes after it's already made a mistake. The attendant turned her back, ignoring any explanation. Lara, with the calm of someone who knows her worth, tried once more. But the contempt had taken root. The stares varied between pity and mockery, as if everyone shared the same thought. She doesn't belong here. That's how prejudice works. Silent but devastating. And the irony. At that moment, the first-class line was the place with the most ignorance per square meter. Often, the real mistake isn't what's said, it's what's assumed. And the assumption here was simple. Simple looks, unimportant person. This is one of those stories that open invisible holes beneath the feet of those who judge, and they don't even realize until they fall. But Lara knew exactly what she was doing there. And what happened next would change not only that space, but its entire perception. Behind that calm expression was a woman with more baggage than any suitcase in circulation. Lara wasn't just a passenger, she was the new CEO. An Oxford graduate, fluent in 5 languages, experienced in major multinationals, she had chosen a simple lifestyle as a symbol of something greater. She knew that to change a company's culture, she couldn't detach from the reality she wanted to transform. And that, my friend, you don't learn in an MBA, you live. It's curious how people still associate power with extravagance, as if someone's value could be measured by the height of their heels or the tag on their clothes. Lara did the opposite. She dressed simply on purpose. Her elegance was in her listening, her presence, and the way she led teams with empathy. You know those leaders who walk into a room and don't need to say a word for everyone to feel it? Lara was one of them. Silent strength, not imposing but inspiring. Choosing to be simple in a world that pushes you toward appearances is a revolutionary act. Lara didn't want just a seat at the top. She wanted to transform the whole staircase. And for that, she had to live the stories of those on the lower steps. How many leaders do you know who actually know the names of those who serve the coffee or clean the floor? Lara knew them, knew their families, understood that a company's real luxury starts with respect, not with the price of the ticket. Even with all the calm in the world, Lara knew that sometimes kindness isn't enough to break deeply rooted prejudice. When she politely showed her boarding pass and insisted, the employee didn't even bother to look closely. Instead, she called security, in front of everyone. And it wasn't really about safety. It was about the message it sent. You don't belong here. You see, these stories aren't just born from rudeness, but from the blind conviction that appearance defines worth. As security approached, a murmur spread among the passengers. Some looked uneasy, others snickered. It was as if the collective judgment was legitimized by a uniform, and it's in situations like this that true character is revealed. A woman being disrespected in public, without raising her voice, without making a scene, yet still treated like a threat. What a cruel irony, right? A first-class ticket wasn't enough to give her a place she had already earned. Only when a company executive appeared and immediately recognized Lara did the atmosphere change. The man interrupted everything with a firm gesture, and at that moment the mocking stares turned into whispers of shame. Because right there in that small theater of arrogance, the script was about to flip. And some stories, when they turn, don't ask for apologies. They expose the truth. But Lara didn't want revenge. She wanted something bigger, and that was coming with her next move. Just a few minutes after the humiliation, the loudspeaker filled the terminal with unexpected solemnity. The airline welcomes its new CEO, Lara Montero, who will be boarding in first class. Silence fell instantly. That same line, which moments ago reeked of judgment, was now frozen. Glances crossed in shock, and whispers turned into gasps of shame. The attendant, pale, clutched her badge as if it could shield her, but it was too late. The truth had landed, non-stop. It's incredible how a single sentence can dismantle an entire structure of prejudice. In that moment, many realized what they had truly done. It wasn't just a customer service mistake. It was a reflection of a deeply rooted culture. You know that feeling of being trapped in your own judgment? That's what filled the air. The announcement wasn't just informative. It was a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. This was one of those stories that didn't need speeches. Lara's mere presence in that corridor, after the reveal, said it all. She didn't look back in anger, didn't point fingers. She walked with the same calm as before, now carrying the symbolic weight of a message. And the most curious part? Her power lay exactly where no one had looked. In the silence before the truth, in the composure during the mistake, and in the poise after the reveal. But there was still more to come. The same passengers who laughed in silence now stood to applaud, a gesture that, although late, showed the impact of what they had just witnessed. Some even came over to apologize, not because Lara had confronted them, but because their internal shame spoke louder. This was one of those stories that teach without raising a voice, and when the lesson is real, it silences even those who think they own the space. A young man had recorded everything on his phone. He posted it on X, formerly Twitter, with the caption, "Judging by appearance might be your biggest mistake." Within hours, the video had gone viral. Thousands of comments poured in. Many related, some reflected, others tried to justify. But the point was clear. No one expected that the ordinary woman was the new CEO. That alone exposed a wound many still prefer to ignore, the subtle kind of prejudice, the one that feels polite but cuts like a hidden blade. And the most remarkable thing? The biggest transformation didn't happen to Lara, but to those who judged her. Every sideways glance, every stifled laugh, every whispered comment became an emotional mirror, the kind that makes you ask yourself, how many stories have I missed because of my own bias? And this kind of reflection, well, when born from a public mistake, often sparks deeper changes than any motivational talk. But Lara had something greater in mind. Most people in Lara's position would have reacted with a summary dismissal or a sharp speech, but she knew that real power doesn't shout, it educates. So instead of punishing the employee, she invited her to join a new internal human development program. And it wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. Lara believed that great stories of change don't arise from punishment, but from awareness. And that awareness begins when someone gives you a second chance, with purpose. She said something that left a mark. The mistake was yours, but the responsibility is ours. We failed to prepare you to see beyond the uniform. That shows rare leadership, the kind that understands you don't change culture by pointing fingers, but by owning your share of the problem. And what did that generate? Respect, inside and outside the company. Because deep down, everyone knows that making mistakes is human, but recognizing systemic failure, that's greatness. The employee, visibly shaken, accepted the invitation, and there began another story worth telling, the story of rebuilding. It wasn't about saving reputations, but about shaping better people. And Lara knew that if she truly wanted to transform the company, she had to start from the ground up. After all, there's no use changing the facade if the foundation is still tainted by prejudice. And the first renovation would start there, but it wouldn't stop there. Lara didn't want that episode to be just a one-off. If change was going to happen, it had to be real. So she created a mandatory institutional campaign across all branches of the company. Empathy, respect, and humanized service as non-negotiable values. And listen, it wasn't just another online course with catchy phrases. These were modules with real simulations, case studies, and exercises with undercover actors. Because some stories can only be learned when you feel what the other person lives. At the campaign launch, she gathered the staff and said, "The luxury of a company isn't in the leather seats, but in the dignity with which we treat every person." The silence in the room spoke louder than any applause. She spoke with truth, from someone who had lived on both sides, the one who judges and the one who is judged. And maybe that's why her words resonated so deeply, because it wasn't a CEO talking to employees. It was a woman talking to people, and that changes everything. That moment sparked a cultural shift. That company, once focused on status and appearances, began to take pride in being a reference for inclusion. Stories of passengers who once would have been ignored now took center stage in boardroom meetings. These accounts moved people, inspired them, and more importantly, guided decisions. And so what started as a public embarrassment became fuel for an institutional transformation. But the impact would go far beyond the boarding gates. What began as a misunderstanding in a boarding line soon made international headlines. Prestigious newspapers like the New York Times and El País reported Lara's actions as an example of inclusive and revolutionary leadership. Renowned universities began studying the case as a reference in cultural transformation and human-centered management. And make no mistake, this wasn't about PR. It was real impact. Because some stories are so powerful, they don't need help to go global. They speak for themselves. Business courses began including the Lara Montero case in their leadership lectures. The question was always the same. How did someone so discreet cause such a profound change? And the answer was there, between the lines of every action. It wasn't about visible greatness. It was about coherence. The kind of coherence that comes from living what you preach, even when no one is watching. The kind of example traditional management books forget to teach, but the real world demands every day. More than attention, Lara wanted ongoing transformation. She created partnerships with public schools, launched scholarships for underprivileged youth, and encouraged the use of real stories in corporate training. Because for her, success only has meaning when it serves others. And the best way to ensure past mistakes don't repeat is by allowing new stories to blossom. In every employee, every client, every gaze that once judged without knowing. The employee who once became the symbol of internal prejudice was now a symbol of change. She went through the development program, dove into the trainings, and little by little, she began to transform. It wasn't easy. Shame, guilt, and fear accompanied every step. But what made the difference was the re-education environment Lara built. There, mistakes weren't eternal punishments. They were doors to new stories. And this one in particular would have a different ending. Today, she leads the company's training department. Irony or justice? Maybe both. But the fact is, she became an internal reference on empathy and professional behavior. In the workshops, she often shares her own story, not as a victim or a villain, but as someone who learned the hard way. And that inspires. Because the kind of change that comes from pain usually teaches the most. And those who hear her story understand. No one is immune to judgment. But we all have a choice about what we do next. New employees learn from day one. Here, every customer might carry a surprising story. Every gesture of contempt might be writing the wrong page in the company's book. And every genuine smile might save an entire interaction. This former employee learned from her mistake. But the most beautiful part is that she chose to teach through her growth. And so what once seemed like a disaster became one of the most inspiring stories the company had ever lived. But what Lara would say at the end of it all was still to come. At the close of one of the team gatherings, Lara stood up, looked at everyone with the calm of someone underestimated 1,000 times, and said, "The difference between arrogance and elegance lies in how you treat those who expect nothing from you." The sentence hit the room like a stone, because deep down everyone had lived a moment where they could have shown more empathy. And that's where the great stories are born, in the exact instant when regret meets the chance for change. She knew that emotion alone doesn't transform companies. What transforms is culture, repetition, decision. That's why every action from that moment on needed to carry a new code of conduct. Look beyond the packaging. Listen without filtering by appearance. Be kind even when no one is filming. Lara didn't just want an efficient company. She wanted a conscious one. And that, my friends, is a goal few leaders dare to take on. In the end, what Lara built wasn't just modern leadership, it was a human legacy, a reminder that the most powerful stories are the ones that force us to look inward. And when a company commits to that inner gaze, everything changes on the outside: service, reputation, culture, results. And maybe, just maybe, the world needs more Laras. But for that, you need to ask yourself, who have you been in other people's stories? Now tell me honestly, how many times have you judged someone without even knowing their name? How many times have you passed someone on the street, at work, or even in your own circle of friends and made assumptions just by looking? Maybe because of wrinkled clothes, a non-standard hairstyle, or a more reserved posture. And how many incredible stories were lost along the way, never even starting because of that? The truth is hard but necessary. Prejudice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It hides behind a sideways glance, an automatic smile, an impatient gesture. That's exactly how it started with Lara. No scandal, no shouting, no audience. Just a silent judgment. The kind we normalize without realizing. A judgment based on appearance, not essence. Lara arrived at the first-class counter with a worn-out backpack, hair in a casual bun, and faded jeans. She wasn't there to impress. She just wanted to board. But the look from the employee said it all. You don't belong here. She didn't even need to say it. And in that awkward silence began yet another one of the many stories ignored by those who think they can measure worth with their eyes. The attendant didn't even check the ticket. She pointed to the economy line with a cold smile. Lara tried to explain politely, showed her boarding pass, but was cut off with a, "You must be mistaken, ma'am." Security was called. The people around? Some looked on with pity. Others smirked as if thinking, she must be trying to sneak in. Prejudice is subtle, but cruel, and the most dangerous kind is the one dressed as protocol. But Lara didn't react the way most expected. She didn't yell. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't beg. She took a deep breath, stepped aside, and made a call. Less than 10 minutes later, the airline's director arrived. Tall, composed, with the calm of someone who carries a powerful last name. Beside him, the company's general manager. Together, they walked past security and went straight to Lara. The check-in employee? She froze when she heard the words. The new CEO is here. Why hasn't she boarded yet? Silence. Lara simply smiled. Not out of vengeance, but awareness. She knew that scene would be remembered, not for the humiliation, but for the turning point, for how a simple, underestimated woman changed the game with dignity. And this wasn't just about her. It was about all the stories of people rejected for not looking the part. The impact was immediate. Videos went viral, comments flooded in, thousands of people related, because deep down, everyone has been Lara at some point. And unfortunately, many have also been the attendant, even unintentionally. The error lies in the structure, in the conditioned gaze. And Lara knew that. That's why her first action as CEO was symbolic. Mandatory empathy training for all employees, with special focus on premium service sectors. She knew campaigns inspire, but only practice transforms. So she chose to transform from the inside out. The modules had something rarely taught. Real stories, customer testimonies of being judged, ignored, humiliated, and employees who once failed but learned. It was about looking in the mirror, not for appearance but for behavior. Lara wanted more than to correct a mistake. She wanted to plant a new ethical code, one that would say, through action, that no one deserves more or less respect because of their bank account or the clothes they wear. A code that understands every face hides a past, a purpose, a story that deserves to be heard. And that's when everything changed. Not just the company, the culture. Employees began seeing themselves as ambassadors of dignity. They listened more, judged less. Clients, in turn, felt the difference. Some returned to flying with the company. Others touched, shared their stories online. A simple action became a global movement. Lara wasn't seeking recognition. She was seeking coherence. She wanted the company to reflect what she believed. That respect isn't a luxury. That empathy can't be an exception. That every customer, regardless of their seat, carries a universe within. And that the most powerful stories often come from the people no one wants to hear. So now tell me, could you also be walking past extraordinary people without noticing, just because they don't shine on the outside? How many opportunities have you missed by believing appearance is a resume? It's time to rethink, to act differently, to be part of the change, not as a spectator, but as a protagonist. And you know why this matters, because every transformation begins in the small things. In a sincere good morning, a respectful glance, an attentive ear. Small acts that write great stories, stories that inspire, that teach, that free, stories that often only need one gesture to begin. So tell us below, have you ever lived something similar? Have you been judged unfairly, or judged someone without meaning to? Share your story. It might touch someone. It might change someone's day. It might teach more than 1,000 speeches. And of course, if this content made you reflect, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and come help us transform more lives, one story at a time.